Tonight's talk is Gardening Made Easier, Gardening for Nature, and I have the pleasure of introducing Eric, as I said, tonight. Eric has been an estate gardener, an arboretum supervisor, and a university botanical garden manager. He started gardening in Kentucky as part of the Back to the Land movement in the 1970s. He attended the Longwood Gardens Professional Gardeners Training Program and is now the New Haven County Coordinator for the Yukon Extension Master Gardener Program. Please welcome Eric Larson.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. You got a big crowd tonight, and thanks for that wonderful introduction, Serena, that I'm looking forward to doing this. So tonight, our little talk is going to be about gardening made easier and gardening for nature. I'm going to start off with the gardening made easier. And there is a mantra that I'm sure that most of you know about that's called the right plant, right place. Well, I'm also going to encourage people to take soil samples every year. This helps us in our gardening in many ways, and to pay attention to soil health. And I'm going to break these subjects down and go one by one, but I wanted to give you an overview of the first part. We're also going to create sensible walkways. We're going to use raised beds whenever possible. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my tool bucket and my garden journal. So the right plant, right place is all about putting the appropriate plant in the appropriate place. And we have to pay attention to sun and shade, obviously. You can divide plants pretty easily into 3 or 4 categories, with full shade on one side and full sun on the other, and then gradations in between. There's a light shade, a dappled shade, and also I mentioned here sun at time of day. A lot of plants, just like us, prefer shade in the afternoon when it gets hot, but they love the sun in the morning to dry off their leaves. And as they come awake after a nighttime with no photosynthesizing, that early morning sun makes a difference. Of course, not only do we have to pay attention to sun exposure, but we have to look at the soil, and is it well drained? Is it moist? Is it dry? We are blessed around here with fairly good soils in terms of their ability to hold water. If you live right along the shoreline, you have a lot of sand to deal with, and that's a well-drained, in fact, sometimes too well-drained soil. You want something kind of in the middle, and this has to do with soil texture, and with the amount of silt, the smallest particles, clay, the smallest particles, silt, the medium size, and the sand, which is the largest size particles in soil. Plant too big or too small.
Excuse me, Eric, we're still seeing your first slide. Are you trying to?
I'm moving them around. Whoops.
Yeah, we're not seeing. This happens to me a lot on Zoom, where it gets stuck on the first one.
Oh.
And you have no idea of knowing that.
I don't.
So one way I get out of it, if you can kind of exit slide view for a moment and see if you can
your shared window to the front. Okay, so this is the first slide. Oh, okay, let's see. Did that change?
No.
Oh, okay. So I'll stop share and try again.
Exactly.
Okay, share screen. All right. Exit, escape, share. Okay, I'm going to try this again. No change?
That
Yes.
works. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so there is the agenda for the first part of the talk: right plant, right place. So paying attention to soil and soil samples, and creating sensible walkways using raised beds, tool bucket, garden journal. So back to the first one: right plant, right place. We want an average well-drained soil is our ideal. And again, unless you have a ledge, a lot of people have rock ledges under their gardens, which adds a certain extra element of beauty to the landscape. It can, but it's hard to garden there because the soil will be in thin layers. So something must be done, and we can talk about that under raised beds. Now, the other problem we have with right plant, right place is plant is too big or too small. It's inappropriate for the site. I think we have all seen in suburban and residential areas where evergreens were planted right up next to the house, and they have become huge trees, big spruces. And this is an example of planting something that will become too big. My mantra for planting trees: think big, plant small. In other words, you want to look at that plant over a lifetime. What's it going to become? Is it going to be a 75-foot behemoth? And how quickly is it going to do that? But you always want to plant small. A tree that is planted as a whip or a very small sapling has a much better chance than if you put a larger tree in. The larger tree will undergo much more transplant shock and sit there for a couple of years. In fact, they've shown through studies that trees of the same species planted in the same spots or nearby, the smaller ones have an advantage over time because they adapt immediately. You're not disturbing the roots that much when you're transplanting them, and it's easier to water them. So right plant, right place. The plant could be too big or too small. There are cases where I've seen dwarf plantings in settings where really they should have gone big. So you also have to look at shallow rooted versus deep root systems. This comes into play in a couple of ways. It's hard to plant a deep rooted like a white oak because they develop a taproot early in their lifespan. It is hard to find anybody who sells a white oak for planting because of this. They have to guarantee their plants. So because it's got a taproot and very difficult to get to transplant, it's hard to find them in the trade. You can though, but you have to plant them very small. But the shallow rooted and the wide rooted plants, for instance, in the hell strip between a sidewalk and the street, if you're planting a large tree that will buckle the sidewalk, there is a long list of accepted street trees that do not do that. You don't want to plant a Norway maple there, for instance, because it will buckle the sidewalk. I'm going to go to the next slide. You tell me if it's okay. Did it work? Yeah? All right. So I say soil samples every year. A lot of people say every other year is good. But especially if you're doing vegetable production, you want to know what the pH is. It can change depending on the soil amendments you use. If you use peat moss, ash from a fireplace, and certain fertilizers will acidify your soil within a year. So you want to do this every year. And I recommend, that the Yukon Soil Laboratory is the best for measuring lead in the soil. The experiment station on Huntington Street here in New Haven will give you an accurate soil sample reading for nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, pH, and a couple of other things, but they will not do a test for lead. So I like doing it every year. I recommend doing it every year. Soil health. And this is a mantra that I go back to is feed your soil first, and it will take care of your plants. By adding compost rather than man-made fertilizer, by using fish emulsion, chicky doo-doo, manures, natural occurring sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. You will not burn the soil microbes. The soil is a living organism with millions upon millions of organisms making up that community, if you will. And you want to encourage that community. And so you want to avoid chemical fertilizers. You want to avoid compacting the soil, especially by walking on it or working it with a rototiller or even with a shovel when it is moist. And again, I avoid rototilling because for a couple of reasons. Soil structure is about the diversity of soil particles in, say, the column of soil. If they're all very, very fine soil particles, it looks good. It's easy to plant in. What happens is after a rain or maybe two rains, that those fine soil particles they kind of mesh they mesh down, and you get this crust on the top. What you want is a mix of fine soil particles, larger beds, and that there are clumps of soil. That's good. You don't have to get it all sieved out and like dough, like a sifted flour. You want to, I even accept rocks as large as my fist in my gardens, because in 500 to 1,000 years, somebody will be gardening in my raised beds, and that will be soil. So again, I avoid rototilling. The other thing about rototilling is that most tillers till down, they get this nice fluffy soil, and then at the lowest level of their reach, there is a layer that becomes a hard pan. If you till the same spot over and over year after year, about 6 to 8 inches down, there will eventually be a hard pan will form, creating possible drainage problems and other issues. So if it's a large, if you're growing corn in a large area or one of the other row crops, rototilling may be the answer. But for home gardeners, I prefer using a shovel myself, and it's what I recommend for other folks too. So design and install sensible pathways. They keep your shoes and your sandals and your pumps and your stiletto high heels clean, minimizes compaction. It's easier to plant, tend, and harvest off to the side, and it keeps your spouse happy with no mud on the kitchen shag carpet. We don't really have shag carpet in the kitchen. I was just making the joke there. So it also, when you add soil, compost and other soil amendments to your growing beds, if you don't have pathways that are permanent, then you will be walking through those beds, and the amendments that you're putting down that can be so expensive and difficult to acquire, you'll be wasting that material in your paths. And so this is another reason why I would recommend raised beds. So here's a pathway at Casa Larsoni, edged with Belgian block. This path again keeps the kitchen, my boots and the kitchen floor clean and my conscience free. And it also, this is golden beach pebbles. It's a nice color, and it's kind of a neutral color. It doesn't necessarily add or detract from the garden around it. So I think I have another one. Here's the gravel path around my little herb garden, and you can see the bags of gravel there. I'm actually redoing this in the next few weeks. So it also helps the compaction that you will by walking in your garden, the compaction that you create will affect certain plants more than others. Some plants don't seem to mind it, but herb plants need sharp drainage. So I put a lot of soil amendments in this bed, such as Turfus, which is a commercial product that increases drainage. Some people use sand, but it depends on how much clay you have in there. You don't want to use sand if you have a lot of clay, because it makes cement. That's what cement is made of. So so that's another reason for good garden paths. And so we come to raised beds. And again, this is all about making gardening easier. It helps avoid compaction because you're not walking in them. They're easier to plant, tend, and to harvest. Especially if you don't go more than 3-4 feet at the most wide. You want to be able to reach all the way across your raised beds. So keep them the 3 feet, 4 at the most. You control the soil contents of that raised bed. You can use topsoil, compost, vermiculite, perlite. Turfus is the product that I mentioned earlier. And in areas with lead present in the soil, this goes back to this very important point. This is why we test for lead in soil. It especially affects children, of course. And I am unfortunate in not having any children or grandchildren, but still, I want to avoid ingesting lead for any. I achieved most of my drain damage in the 60s and 70s. So the lead, interestingly, translocates through plants to the leafy parts and the roots most readily. It is not easily translocated through the plant to fruit. So tomatoes, peppers, that sort of thing, it's not as much of a problem. I still am not comfortable with lead soils, even if I'm growing tomatoes or peppers. So what you do with the raised bed is you put a membrane down under the bed when you're constructing it. You can use pond liner, you can use landscape fabric, but it should be the spun landscape fabric, not the woven one. It needs to be spun. It needs to be pretty heavy, and then you want to fill it with compost. And so this membrane keeps your vegetable roots from reaching into the soil, the parent soil underneath it, and contacting the lead and translocating it. So continued, when you add compost, soil amendments, and others, you are focusing all of that on your plants and not on your walkways when you have raised beds. So it's going to the plants and not to your walkways. It's also, watering is more focused in raised beds. It's easy to set up automatic systems as well. There's lots of systems available. You can look in many garden catalogs and find them. I prefer hand watering for a couple reasons. Just the gadgetry, the extra that you will need to set up the system, and the tubes and the pipes. I don't like the look of it. And also, if one comes loose while I'm traveling in Patagonia, for instance, you're going to flood areas. So I prefer hand watering and getting someone to come water for me when I am in Patagonia, for instance. That the raised beds also warm up earlier in the spring. This is a really good point. Mostly because they drain better than the parent soil. The water hits it and it drains right through. And it allows you to get in there for planting and other operations earlier in the spring. They do dry out more quickly, of course. They're up above ground, so the gravity is working not in your favor. But that's one of the reasons I like to hand water, is that automatic watering, it's hard to get a system that will water the chard a little bit more and the beets a little bit less, and that sort of thing. I like to be very hands-on with that. So here's a raised bed with peas, fava beans, some chard, and some lettuce. And if you notice the trellis, I've got all these folks, the pictures in the way. There we go. You notice the trellis is waiting for my alderman peas on the outside, on the far right, to reach it. This also provides a seasonal visual barrier with my neighbor's yard. My peas are taking the advice my wife gave me, which is to grow up. Okay, yeah. Did my wife put that in there? Okay, let's see. Uh-oh, talking Eric Larson. Let's see. Okay, here's, let me go back. Yeah, that's right. This is my ziggurat of green power. This 4x4 arrangement, and this is untreated green fir. It's what when you go into one of the big box stores, you'll see treated lumber on one side, and on the other side, it's mostly green fir. So this arrangement allows for flexibility in the summer months, in that the north side, I plant lettuce for midsummer because it's somewhat shaded. It still gets plenty of sunlight, but it's more shaded. And on the top and south sides, I plant small plants like peppers, eggplants, and maybe a determinate tomato. Right now, it's all lettuce and spinach. It's again 100% compost and a little bit of soil amendments and a little bit of parent soil, but it's mostly compost. So this is a stone raised bed. It's about 24 inches high. I have root crops planted in this, carrots and parsnips, that I have interplanted with lettuce. The lettuce I will harvest long before the parsnips and the carrots have gotten big enough to interfere with them. The mounted stones there on the front and on the side are for another project nearby, which will be a sitting area border with those stones in it. So this is my new bed there in the back. In the foreground is an older bed with trellis, peas, onions, and other things. That one in the back is manufactured stone. I think it's Nicoloc that I had a bunch of it left over from another project. So I just made a little half circle bed and filled it with compost. Now, I'm not here to sell anybody anything, but I use Coast of Maine raised bed medium, and also their compost. It's really, really high quality stuff. I've had good luck with it. But again, I'm not here to sell a product. That's just my preference. And raised beds are not just for veggies. You can see right here, I've got my tulip planting. And in the back, in the farthest back is another tulip planting. I planted over 1,000 bulbs in my garden last year. You can see the both of them, I have labeled them because I'm going to be digging those tulips after they've completed their photosynthesis and the leaves die back, and I will plant them again next year. You can also see I have several types of gravel walkways. There's the flagstone on top of quarry dust, and then the Belgian block, and then the pebbles to the right. So again, this is after I dig the tulips, then I can plant late season vegetables in this bed. With raised beds, because you're controlling the fertility so carefully, you can expect to get much more out of the soil. Not that we should be thinking extractive here. That's not the point. We want to be feeding our soil with compost, manure through the summer. Usually we put manure on in the winter time and early spring, and we use compost in the summertime, and that keeps the carbon in the soil and also the major nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium at levels that are optimum for plant growth. So now we're to this is also along the lines of how we can make gardening easier. And I think many of you have a tool bucket. So I just wanted to say that you want to keep the contents to only what you normally use on a daily basis. And that acronym there stands for Do what I say, not what I do. My tool bucket will come to, I'll show you a picture in a minute, is full of, odd tools. I have a hacksaw in there. I have several kinds of pliers. I have a water church key that will fit 4 different sizes of water outlets. I have tools that you would probably never use, but because I'm a professional gardener and I go to clients on site, I have to have all the tools that I might need. I can't run into the barn or the shed to get the one I want. I have to have them there. So a tool bucket also helps keep things clean because you're wiping them down before you put them back in the bucket. It also helps to preserve cutting edges and the cleanliness of tools, and helps to keep them dry and in one place. Before I had this bucket, I had, kind of a bag of this kind of tool and some in the back of my truck and sort of that. So the tool bucket helps me keep things together. So what might you have in a tool bucket? Of course, you'll have your pruners and your harrow, which is a 3-pronged tool that we use to scuffle up the soil and break up that crust that forms after a rain. I have weed pullers. In fact, I have several of many of these because not only am I a professional gardener, but as the coordinator for the Master Gardeners, I go to project sites, and not everyone may have come with a pair of pruners. So I have 4 or 5 pruners in my bucket, as well as weed pullers. I have twine, plastic ties. I have knife. Wire cutters are a good thing. You don't want to be using your pruners to cut wire. So I have several kinds of gloves: leather for pruning roses, light duty for most everything else, and neoprene or other waterproof gloves for dealing with poison ivy, or if there is if I'm using fish emulsion, I'll put on a neoprene glove on the hand that needs it. Screwdriver, always a good thing. Hey, pen or pencil and paper. This is important. How many times have I been in my garden and my hands are dirty? I'm not going to use my phone, but if I have a scrungy pad, one of those that'll fit in my pocket, and I have it in a pocket in the bucket, and a pencil or pen, I can write down notes for myself then. And then later, I can try and read them and interpret them. I have pruning saw and scissors. The scissors come in handy because there's a lot of things that pruning shears won't take care of. It's nice to have scissors for that. So here's a picture of my tool bucket gone feral. And you can see it's pretty chock full. A lot of the pockets on the side and on the inside. I have 3 or 4 pairs of gloves. Those pockets are not full. I've used tools and thrown them in there. I periodically go through once a week and put the tools in the correct pockets. And then I also, of course, you want to keep the rain out of it. So there's my tool bucket. How about a garden journal? So in my garden journal, I record rainfall, and we are still in a drought. Summer rainfall can be variable from one site to another within the same township, so it doesn't really help to know that the weather station in Hamden got 1.2 inches. I might have gotten 0.4 inches or maybe 2 or more. So know how much rain you or your garden have been getting. And you want to record general weather data: cloudy, windy, or hot. You can record high-low temperatures as well. I'd like to keep a track of the cloudy and windy days, and the hot, of course, the hot days. The windy days, there's a lot of it increases the transpiration from plants, dries them out more quickly, and stresses them more quickly. So I like to be able to look back at my book and say, oh, we had 3 rainy days, windy days last week. No wonder things are so dry. I also have a soil temperature gauge, which I use in the spring and I record every day. So it's helpful to get a soil thermometer. You want to put it 2 inches below the soil level if you are planting seeds. You want to put it 6 inches below, 4 to 6 inches below the soil level if you are transplanting plants. That's where the root ball is once you get it in the ground. There is I think some of you get my Plant of the Week article. I did an article on soil temperature and optimum planting for different plants. Of course, the early season plants, the lettuce, spinach, kale, all the collards, all of the brassicas, cabbage, broccoli, etc. Prefer soil temperatures in the 60s. Once you get to 70, you can start transplanting out your tomatoes and peppers. And once you get the soil temperature gets up near 80, then you can plant your cantaloupes and okra and other real warm season plants. In my journal, I record what I do in the garden, and that includes planting, weeding, fertilizing, pruning, etc. And I get pretty detailed. It wouldn't help you to see a picture of my journal because I have a really bad scrawl. I'll give a doctor a run for the money in that regard. I also record planting and harvest dates, and also what is planted where. I try as much as possible to avoid those little plastic stakes saying this over here is flashy troutback lettuce, and this over here is Salvindus lettuce. I put it in my, I put the plot plan in my journal and keep it that way. And also it helps when you saw the first whatever, whether it's a lilac flower or the first stink bug or the first hummingbird, whatever, those points of nature help us in kind of estimating next year's hatch of stink bugs and aphids and all kinds of things. And it's also nice to have, the hummingbirds appeared in our feeder late in May last year. I can't remember the exact date, but this year we'll see. And I like to keep track of that. So that it concludes the first part of this. The second part is gardening for nature. And so I'm going to take a quick drink of water. I'll be right there. So, gardening for nature. This is about reducing or eliminating the use of pesticides. You want to plant native plants whenever possible. And we'll talk a little bit about this after I get through this little list. And you want to plant some appropriate non-natives. Of course, if we only planted natives, we would starve. A lot of the plants, vegetable plants that we are familiar with came from Europe, a lot of them. Okra from Africa, of course. Corn was native, and the squashes were native, and the beans, most of the beans were native. Peppers were native. But in my garden, I'm not strictly native, obviously, but I do prefer to grow native plants when gardening for nature. And what is a native? A native plant, to me, is a plant that occurred naturally in our region. Now, I have a pawpaw tree growing in my garden. And I love the pawpaws. I don't know why everybody doesn't have one in their yard. It's not really native. It's to our region. It is native further south into the Smoky Mountains, the higher elevations, and all through the south, really. But because it is climatized to high elevation in the south, it can take cold temperatures. It's perfectly hardy, well into zone 6 and probably in the lower, zone 5B. So you want to I plant some appropriate non-natives. You want to look out for cultivars. For instance, there's some cultivars of the echinacea that are hard for pollinators to use. They got double flowers, and the pollinators really, some of them can't get into where the pollen is. There is a sunflower. I can't remember the varietal name, but it's a dwarf sunflower. It does not have any pollen at all. It just flowers, produces seed. There's no pollen involved at all. Also, when you're gardening for nature, we have to accept a new aesthetic. You saw those pictures of my garden with all those paths so nicely laid out. Well, I firmly believe that every garden has to have wildness within it. And that's part of this new aesthetic, is that there has to be areas that we don't disturb, that we kind of let things grow on their own. Now, I'm not saying that you don't try to fight the mugwort or the poison ivy or other things, but there are parts of our landscape that should remain wild if possible. So again, reiterating that the pollinators are not just the bees, but birds, bats, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, small mammals, and of course, bees, including honeybees. But also there are a lot of solitary bees, the bumblebees, carpenter bees, all those. So that is that they're one of the many pollinators that we'll find in our yards. So nature versus nature. Okay, so here we're looking at ticks. What the hell? They're not pollinators. They are part of nature, but we don't really want them in the landscape. Now, I know some people who use peahens to control ticks, and they do a wonderful job. But you have to live in the right place, and you have to protect the peahens from foxes and other varmints at night. Birds are beautiful and very interesting visitors to our gardens, but they deposit seeds of oriental bittersweet, euonymus, and many, many other invasive plants. So I always welcome birds to my garden, but I know full well that it's part of my job to pull up those invasives before they get a long, serious root going. And of course, groundhogs, chipmunks, deer, voles, all of these are part of nature, but do we really want them in our yard? A lot of people love the deer. I understand that. They're very picturesque. But for me, living here in Whitneyville and Hamden, we don't have a deer problem, knock on wood. And I appreciate that. I like looking at them up in the golf course and and on the lawns of the uber wealthy up in along Ridge Avenue. But I don't have that problem down here. Even the beneficial insect, the praying mantis, they eat bees, they eat pollinators, they're an omnivore. They even eat themselves. In fact, if you get one of those wonderful egg cases that in the spring, when those things hatch out, the first thing that happens is they eat each other. They're amazing cannibals. It's great for a 6-year-old boy they love to watch this kind of action. And then finally, after there's enough size on the survivors, they wander off and look for other prey, P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y. So we have to bear in mind that nature is a complicated and dynamic system that we only can control a little bit of it, that we have to accept that we're not in charge, except for a very small part of it at great expense to our time and energy. So nature versus us. It's probably best not to plant a pollinator garden near a busy highway like the Merritt Parkway or Route 1 or the Boston Post Road, just like you wouldn't put a bird feeder in your yard with feral or outside dwelling cats hanging around. You want to keep your pollinator garden away from uncertain landscapes such as golf courses and high-end developments. Now, there has been a change in the ethic in the larger scheme of things. There has been a change in the ethic and the practices of golf courses and high-end developments. But if you don't know, or if you see those little signs that this lawn has been treated, then you want to avoid those situations. Find another place to put your pollinator garden. And again, the right plant, right place still applies. So, how to? Well, first of all, you want to choose your plants and your seed mixes carefully. You want, if you use seeds, it's much cheaper that way. And it usually comes in mixes for a given area and, and sun exposure. There are some mixes that have sun preferenced perennials and annuals, and some mixes that have shade preferenced plants. Woody plants are a good idea. They cover the ground easier, and they're easier. They make more of a splash right away. You want to start with as clean a site as you can. If they're at the site at the library that we're going to meet at on May 8th, has been rototilled twice, and the clumps of sod and other plants, other debris have been mostly cleared out. That is as good as we can get it. If it had been my preference, I would have gone in there in August of last year. If we had a time machine, we go back to August and we cover it with clear plastic for the whole winter. That will kill everything. The sun actually heats up clear plastic. It gets hotter under there than it does under black plastic. It kills weeds and weed seeds to a depth of about 1.5 inches or 2. So you lay out the area starting with any woody plants you're going to use, siting them properly. In other words, right plant, right place. You want to give them if it's a suckering shrub like one of the viburnums, the native viburnums like arrowwood, you want to give them plenty of room, a good 8 foot around. Don't plant just one. Now, if it's an arrowwood viburnum, I might just plant one if it's in a small space. But I would plant in groups of odd numbers, like 3 Fothergilla gardeniae, which I'll show you a picture of the flower in a bit. So you start with woody plants, and the evergreen plants, like the native eastern red cedar, which is a Juniperus virginiana, they provide winter cover and food for some pollinators, so they use them as the skeleton of your garden. In other words, you use those evergreens to, in the wintertime, you'll have an interesting line or a clump of these evergreens. Then you think about flowers. Now, I know we have a plan for the library garden that is all flowers, I believe. That's fine, considering the space. That's appropriate. I'm adding these the woody plants and the evergreens in because they are important to pollinators, and especially flowering trees. For that amount of space that a dogwood, for instance, give you, the number of flowers on that plant provide an amazing forage for pollinators and other insects. So I'm going to start with some flowering trees and shrubs. I don't have pictures of all these because I wanted to make sure that I could, I wouldn't be talking all night. I know the sound of my voice is very soothing, and I would have to call every one of you up and kind of jingle you awake. So this is a picture of the flower of the Fothergilla gardeniae, and it is a lovely native shrub with these wonderful honey-scented bottle brush flowers that appear in May and sometimes into June, depending on where it's sited. It prefers full sun or morning sun, afternoon shade. It has fantastic fall color. And you talk about pollinators loving a plant. I think all of these plants are very, very pollinator friendly, but Fothergilla is in a class of its own. Itea virginica, or summer sweet, is a plant that blooms again in the summer, late June into July, white fragrant flowers. Clethra alnifolia also blooms in midsummer, also a native. Calycanthus floridus blooms early in early to mid-May. It is sweet shrub, very, very fragrant flowers, redolent of pineapple. Benthamidia Florida is the new name for the flowering dogwood. These are now we're into trees. The flowering dogwood, Chionanthus virginiana, which is a wonderful. It's the fringe tree, a lovely native with white, totally knock dead, fragrant flowers, and Cladrastus species, excuse me, which have fragrant pea-like flowers, also a native. So when you're dealing with the flowers, you're looking for mixes. If you're planting from seed, you're looking with mixes with staggered flowering times. Now, a lot of these mixes automatically have it, but it's good for you to familiarize yourself with what's inside the package. It's always labeled. It will give you oftentimes percentages of different mixes. Early summer is a great time for wildflowers. There are many genera and species, and we'll look at one in a minute on a slide. Midsummer is when the compositae or the sunflower or aster family begin their dominance, and which includes the late asters, goldenrods, and some others. If you're thinking about planting from seed, you can have annual and versus perennial mixes. There are some mixes that provide a little of both, so you get some annuals that come up and flower quickly for a good show and plenty of pollinative power in that first year, and they will reseed if they are happy. The biennials will also reseed after flowering the second year. Perennials are longer lasting, and unlike annuals, they have a pretty prescribed and narrow schedule for flowering. Annuals often will flower for most of the summer, especially if you can cut them back. But perennials are generally, with some exceptions, generally they're flowering for 10 days to 2 weeks. As I say, there are some longer lasting ones and some very shorter lasting ones as well. So this is a bachelor's button. This is early spring to early summer. Centaurea cyanus, beautiful blue. It also comes in shades of white, pink, carmine, purple. Later, this is a picture of the composites, the aster or sunflower family. And again, many of these are perennials. Also, many of them are annuals, and they will reseed if they're happy. As I mentioned, they prefer full sun, as do the bachelor buttons. I'm going to focus on full sun here. Late summer, of course. Oh, look at that. The goldenrod or solidago species. And also we get asters, and there are some interesting shade-loving plants like Cimicifuga that bloom much later, even into October and November. So the goldenrod is a really important pollinator plant, pollinator-friendly plant, because there is so much of it. So when we're talking about plugs versus plants, when you're planting herbaceous plants, the plants are generally 2 years of growth, and they are more expensive, but there is a better success percentage in their life. They're a little harder to plant because you have to dig a deeper hole, and they're also a little heavier. They're in pots. You have to carry them to the job site and plant them. Plugs, which is what we see here, are 1 year growth. They're less expensive, and with less of a percentage of success. They are also easier to plant and to handle. So as I understand it, we're going to be planting plugs and potted plants at the library on May 8th, which I'm really looking forward to. So that, when we're thinking pollinator plants, there are some non-natives worth considering. Now, Buddleia can be invasive in parts of Connecticut, in the drier parts, but it blooms a long time, and so it provides, especially if you deadhead it, It provides a long season of bloom for pollinators, and they love it. They cover it. They don't call it butterfly bush for no reason. All Lamiaceae, or this is the mint family. What they used to call Menthaceae is now Lamiaceae. Can be aggressive. Of course, if anybody has planted mint in their garden and 1 year and found it on the other side of the house, on the other side of the interstate, you'll know what I'm talking about. But pollinators love all of the mint family. Here's an interesting one, Vitis agnus castus. This is not invasive. It is the chaste tree, C-H-A-S-T-E. I don't have a picture of it, but it's a very interesting European native that was planted in, that was used in the Dark Ages of Europe to suppress the sexual urges of priests. They made an infusion of it, and it helped them achieve their stated goals of celibacy. And then Orindium, which is also called sea holly. I've got some pictures of these we'll go through real quick. Here's Buddleia. Oh my gosh, there's a butterfly or two on it. And as I say, butterflies love it. They don't call it butterfly bush for nothing. It's a very fragrant plant. It's one of the shrubs that you can cut down to the ground in early spring and control its height that way. If you don't do that, they tend to be kind of leggy, rangy, odd-looking things. But if you cut it down every spring, it's one of those plants that blooms on first-year wood. And so you get the blooms at face level instead of way up where you have to climb a ladder to cut them. It makes a great cut flower, but I wouldn't cut it because pollinators love it. So any of the mint family, this is a spearmint with a bumblebee on it. Lovely, isn't it? But thyme, oregano, all of the mint family, the pollinators go crazy for it. Also, another family that I should mention, Apiaceae, which includes dill, fennel, and several other flowers, ornamental flowers. This family also attracts many pollinators. So look for that as well. I like thinking about things in families because there are commonalities that that helps me to keep everything straight that way. So here's a picture of Orindium, and this damn sea holly can be a thug. If it's not, if you don't, you can control it, but you kind of control the root system every year, and also it will reseed. So you have to go through, be ready to pull up the little seedlings and sever the root system going out to the side. I love it. You can't get that color anywhere, and the structure of it in a vase is absolutely stunning. So there's more that we can do. Bee hotels for solitary bees. It's like if you cut a bunch of bamboo 8 inches long and you stack it inside of a wood frame so they're parallel to the ground, and you cover one end of it. There are many bees and other pollinators that will use that for their little nest. Of course, you don't want to put this near the house, but it's nice to have them on the property. It helps pollinators feel at home. So you also want to remember that insects, either benign or beneficial species, represent the vast majority that we see. There are only a few that we have to worry about in terms of eating our produce or chewing the wood in our houses, etc. So you don't have to know every one of the benign or beneficial ones. It would be good to know the bad guys and then assume the rest are okay. You can also take, while I'm on this subject, you can also take samples. If you catch one, put it in a little jar and take it to the Agricultural Extension's experiment station on Huntington Street here in New Haven. They will help you, they will identify it for you and let you know whether it's a problem or it could be beneficial. Also, visit other pollinator gardens in the area. There's a really nice one at Hammonasset. There are several in Milford that one of our master gardeners, Cheryl Capiali, takes care of. They're all over the place, and that's why the Pollinator Pathways is such a great program, because it's promoting more and more of these gardens as we give them more forage and cover in the state of Connecticut. It's a great program, and I'm really looking forward again to May 8th, when we'll all be out there with our kneeling pads, our shovels, our little diggers, and lots of elbows. So I think that's it. Thank you for your attention. And again, this came through my time as the coordinator for the Master Gardener program. And I've had a lot of help along the way from throughout my career from master gardeners, interns, other gardeners that I've met, and nature itself. So with that, I'll stop my share, and I'll entertain questions.
Actually, I have a question, Eric.
Okay.
I'll start my video here quickly. And this has to do with the library project. And I'm thinking about the fact that we did some tilling, but we didn't leave huge clumps in the ground for that. You talked a little bit about how big the clump should be if you're starting a new bed. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You do want clumps of sod out. As the sod, first of all, it's going to be a source. If it grows, then it's going to be a weed problem. If it doesn't grow, if the clump is, if the green part is underground, it is going to be decomposing, and in so doing, we'll be using nitrogen around it as it decomposes. So clumps of sod, other stuff like that, yes, out. Your situation has been rototilled. That is a fact of it's, you know, that is a fact. It's that we're going to just deal with. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, especially for these for many of the pollinator plants, the wildflowers, they are happy to have some sunlight and some space. If there is a hard pan to underneath it, they're going to deal with that better than grass will. Grass roots only grow to a certain depth anyway. Some of the prairie grasses will grow deep, but the root systems of forbs, which is a term for herbaceous plants, the root systems of forbs go quite deep, will break through hardpan. And also, that's only been tilled this year. Before that, it was sod. So the hardpan hasn't built up just because one guy went over it twice with a tiller.
Oh, great.
You will have no problem with the soil texture.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I know there's a question out there about my headgear.
Yeah.
I am bringing back the pillbox hat for men. Now, there are many different names for this hat, kepi, but this hat was made in Turkey, and I love it. And so that's what I'm trying to do by wearing this hat. And I get odd looks. And I also realized that if I was a person of color, it would be somewhat of a liability. And so that understanding my white privilege helps me get past it.
Does it have a tassel?
No tassel on this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
On weed control.
Yes, Ben. Yeah.
In the area up, which was at one time called the Reading Garden near the entrance to the library.
Yeah.
There was a mass infestation of bindweed.
Oh.
Yeah. And I don't think a rototilling will control it.
No.
Every little root bit turns into a weed.
One more, yeah.
Correct. That is correct.
Mm.
You're gonna in this situation, because you're planting everything a foot apart, you're going to have some serious hand pulling in front of you. And even mulching, if we, if the mulching gets done, which I recommend, it will control the soil moisture. Bindweed will grow right through that.
Yeah.
And you're right, the roots break off. It is going to be one of those, it's a battle of wills. I've gotten rid of the bindweed in my yard by just staying after it. If it comes up, if you can get it before it's an inch high and remove that as deep as you can get it, well, it is robbing the rootstock, which is still down there. I understand that. If you're just vigilant about this, you're robbing the rootstock of any chance for carbohydrates through photosynthesis, and you will eventually get it, but it takes at least a year, and you can't let it go for even a month. You got to be out there every other week pulling it before it gets too long. If it gets too long, all that leaf surface is sending more nutrients, more power to the root system. So I'm afraid that you're right, that there's no easy answer here for bindweed. It's going to be somebody being responsible and doing that. Serena,
Yes.
am I correct in understanding that you have some interns who are interested?
Yes, we have.
Okay,
I got
good.
a really big response this afternoon. So
Excellent. Well, here's the thing about the interns from the Master Gardener program. They are definitely hands-on workers, but I don't want it just to be a weed pulling expedition. I want there to be some kind of outreach. If you can be someone can be responsible to say, hey, the Master Gardener interns will be out there next Thursday or next Saturday or whatever, pulling, taking care of our garden. Go meet them, go talk to them. I want there to be an interchange, not just weed pulling. So, okay.
Yeah.
But Ben, you make a great point. Bindweed is a serious and pervasive and more than pervasive weed, but you can get it. You can get it. You just have to be vigilant. Don't let it get enough growth to send any power to the roots.
Does the agricultural mulch, that woven stuff, have any chance of controlling it?
I've seen it grow through the woven stuff. You mean the woven mulch? Yeah. I don't really like that stuff very much. It does control some weeds, but things like bindweed and other things will grow right through the mesh, and then you're pulling. You're trying to get the roots of that weed, and you're pulling up the. It's a hassle. It's a hassle. I'd rather just mulch it with, with organic mulch, and do my best with weeding. Now, here's the thing. I have used cardboard and mulch to great effect. So that would require someone cutting cardboard into place between the plants and putting mulch on top of it. That will last 2 years. It really works. The bindweed might try to come up in the space where the plant is, but again, it's a lot easier to get that than it is, in those spaces than it is the whole area.
Yeah.
So cardboard and mulch I have used, it works. It's a little hard to put it down, but it works.
Okay.
Okay. I was trying Roundup.
Yeah.
No, we don't want to use that.
I know, that's desperation.
Yeah. It is a product that I've used on poison ivy.
Yeah.
And some other like weeds. I've had some experience with the giant hogweed, I think it is.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's nasty stuff. You don't want to get near it. But I tend to avoid Roundup, but I understand its utility for certain plants and in certain situations. In my walkways and in other areas, I use a combination of vinegar, salt, and a couple of drops of dish detergent.
Yeah.
And that takes care of that. In the walkways,
Right.
you don't want to hit any of your plants, the plants you want with it.
Can you say more about hogweed? Is it like poison ivy where it gives you a rash?
Herbal.
It's worse than that.
Yeah.
It's a big weed that I have not seen it in New Haven County. It may be here, but I've not seen it.
I know several places.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
my
and on Highway 69 coming up.
Yeah.
Just around the lakes, there's a whole field of it there.
Oh.
And there's some in Bethany over on the west side. There is northwest side there. I know some houses that have it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a large plant. It grows to 10 feet even.
Mhm.
And it looks like hogweed, but it has more dentate leaves on it. And it has an oil on the leaves that when you even touch it slightly, this oil reacts with sunlight that creates a second or even a third degree burn, a blister
Ooh.
that leaves scars. So it is bad news to deal with, unless you're on the top of a big tractor or you're working at it from away from it with Roundup. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? No.
Well, fantastic. I will. You can say if you come up with one with a question in the middle of the night tonight, which is often when I come up with my most well thought out queries. You can save it, write it down, and I will see you on May 8th.
Okay.
With my kneeling pads, my trowel,
Yes.
and my shovel.
Yeah, I had another question.
Okay, Ben.
Not a weed control, but you mentioned that there are all kinds of pollinator gardens which are open to the public. Can you send us a list of some places we can easily go?
Wow, that's a great idea. Does anybody here, the Pollinator Pathway Project has a list of, contributors and gardens. And Ben, I will look that up. I'll try to get that for you and have that for on May 8th. That'll probably be the best timing for me.
Mhm.
Does that work? Okay.
Yep.
It would be wonderful to post that on our site so people can know places to visit this beautiful spring.
I'll try and get it before then.
But no hurry, but just it would be great if you could also like email it to Gail so that we could post it as a way that people beyond those there on May 8th could enjoy it, because we thank you so much for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll try and get it to Gail in the next few days.
Great. Okay, there's a question.
Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, you're looking in the chat room?
Yeah, it was just had to go, but it was great. So just so you know.
Okay. All right. Well,
So
I don't want to have to stretch this hat. Let's not get my head too big here.
Okay.
So I have a quick question.
Okay.
Yeah.
What time is this pollinator garden thing happening on May
It's
8th?
from 10 to 1.
And anybody can
Yes.
come?
Anybody can come with shovels, with hand tools, and a kneeler. That's what I suggest. Or if you have a short shovel, that would help too.
Short shovels. And Liz, the sign up and the information is on the very front page of our website as well.
There will be.
Oh, I didn't know there was a sign up for it. Okay.
There will be work other than on your hands and knees.
Yeah.
It sounds like there will be people on their hands and knees actually planting, but we'll have to have groups of people bringing them the plants so that they don't have to get up. While we can be more efficient about this, and yeah.
So 10 to 2?
Yeah.
10 to 1.
10 to
And
1.
if you have a wheelbarrow and you want to throw it in the back of your truck, that would help too.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Good.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you. It was
you.
interesting. It was really good.
All right. Thanks, everyone. A wonderful evening, and we will sign off for now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Happy
Thanks,
gardening,
Sarah.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.